Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Welcome, everyone, to Theoryforge Chronicles, our first episode. And yes, I guess we cannot have a Theoryforge without me messing up the deck. Anyways, so reset, and here we go. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 1, a new chapter. We are going to start a regular show. So thanks for joining us. And just real quick, so I'm Phantomix, and we also have Diggs, Sog, and Legendary No Toxin, and we will be your regular hosts. And we are lucky enough to be joined by Snipehunter. So not only do we get to have a awesome first episode with all you all watching us, but Snipehunter has agreed to join us. So we are ready to go. I know y'all have a lot of questions. I'm sure we have questions. Before we get started, if you do, I'll put it in chat. We're going to actually capture some questions for later. So certainly if you have things that come up, let us know, and we'll try to get to them later. So Snipehunter, thanks for joining us.
Hell yeah. Happy to be here.
Cool. All right, guys. Who wants to start?
I want to start. So one, just to follow up, if we don't get to questions this time, we'll probably try and, if we know answers, we'll try and point you in the right direction next time, or we will save them for the next time we have a dev on and try and get them answered officially then. So I really wanted to have Snipe on just so I can understand more about the game, because for me, every time I read the blogs, I come away thinking I should be excited, but I'm like, ugh, I don't want to play that game. And I think it's just a matter of spin. There's lots of focus on the mechanics. Like I read about the communications, the dev blog about that, and normally I think it kind of has mechanics that I would be interested in, but I just felt like, oh, that's a lot of work. That's not fun. And I think Snipehunter can spin it in a way that it would be fun, because he did that with Revival. And there seems to be lots of similarities with Revival, so there's part of me thinking that I should be very interested in it. But I'm wondering, this is not an MMORPG. We finally have the other devs on board with calling it a meow, multiplayer evolving online world. And so what are the major draws? People are hoping to have a MMORPG that is the new WoW, the WoW killer. And what are the types of things that you think will be enticing to those players, if those are the players that you're looking to attract?
That's an interesting question. I actually, I have to candidly say, I don't know that we'll be a WoW killer. I wish we were, because that would say something about the people we get to play with. You know what I mean? But I think, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but I was going to say,
no,
I think that...
I'm talking over you, but I'm just saying WoW killer is not that. I was just throwing that out there. But I'm saying for those of us who are looking for the really next great MMORPG, or in this case, multiplayer evolving online world, that is going to captivate us and really get us wanting to live in the world, what is it about Chronicles of Elyria that's going to captivate us?
And I think that's actually a piece of the trick right there, is that it has to be a world first and a game second. And that's almost an uncomfortable proposition for some players, to be honest. It's a little like asking someone to get up on stage and improv, right? If that's something that you're comfortable with, that is an amazing experience, and it's awesome and it's fun. But if that's something you've never done before, you have to get out of your comfort zone to even give it a shot to see if it's something that you want. And that's actually why I don't think we'll be a WoW killer. It's not that I don't think we've got the features that'll kill WoW. I think we don't necessarily have a way to get everyone to experience it yet, and that's the part that I regret. Because I think if we could get people out of their comfort zone and they could come and they could see what a virtual world could be, it would be better for everyone. It would be what everybody wanted. Like when we first stepped into Ultima Online, or even before that, when we were playing MUDs, we had whole worlds in our head. We had whole adventures, whole ideas of what we were and who we were doing. And it was no disrespect to WoW. I love WoW, but it was not that, right? That's a different kind of game entirely. And so what we are is an attempt to sort of recapture that magic with all of the technology and all of the like foresight or hindsight rather that we have now to build a real like literal world, everything that Dungeons and Dragons offers without any of the hassle of having to know your character sheet or roll some dice or any of that stuff, right?
Yeah, except when I read through the blogs, that's what I get. Like, ugh, do I really have to go through all that just to have fun in the game? And so I think what I liked about the Revival dev blogs is that I got a feeling of what characters would do a day in the life. It wasn't just, hey, we've got these great mechanics and you're going to love how intricate these all work together to give you this great experience. I want to know what it's going to be like when I get. And so one of the things is like you have these tribes, and now we have to completely reorient what our terminology is. So that's a bit of an impediment. But so we have these tribes. I don't know what these tribes are like. I know what a dwarf is like. I know what an elf is like. I know what an orc is like. And now I have these tribes, and I don't know what it's like to be Erishe, which I can't be, by the way. And I guess the closest is a Weird, but as an African American, I don't want to be stuck playing a white person, and I Absolutely. Don't necessarily want to be stuck with European culture. So these other cultures, I have to learn about them. And so jumping in, it's just a little bit difficult understanding what a day in the life. We don't have our set classes. I know what a ranger is going to be like. I know what a rogue is going to be like. And so for me, when I'm looking to try and jump into the world, I don't really care so much about the systems. I mean, I hope the systems are there that's going to make it fun, or going to make it work in a way that keeps us invested in the world. Right. But I don't know, just going in and saying, hey, I want to be a character and do this day to day. I'm having trouble getting connected in that way. So I guess just, I don't know, maybe what's it like for characters in this game?
So that really depends on the character, which is not an answer, so I apologize. But part of what we're trying to do is something that we were also trying to do back on Revival, right? We don't want to force you to play the game in a particular way. We don't want like the reason you know what an orc is, or the reason you know how a dwarf plays, is because there's a set of rules and restrictions and constraints that come with that idea, right? A dwarf without a beard is an absurdity, right? Like that there are rules about these things because that's what those concepts mean, and you have to adhere to those rules when you use them. But what if I wanted to be a dwarf without a beard? Or what if I wanted to just be a baker, for example, right? There's no real game that lets you do that right now. And so that's the kind of thing that Chronicles of Elyria wants players to be able to do. I don't necessarily have the right to tell you what class to be or how to play the game, because it's not a game in that sense. It's a world. It's really more of a question of what you want to do with it, and it will respond and it will present you with new opportunities and ways to play as you do. So you could jump into the game as a 12-year-old orphan, weird in weird places, right? And you could decide you're going to run away from your orphanage before you're even old enough to really be on your own and go out and live in the forest. And that could be your adventure for literally an entire lifetime. It really depends on what you want to do. That said, we're also not necessarily just going to leave you hanging. One of the cool aspects of the game is this idea of a sort of personal destiny, a legend or a myth that sort of you're the main character of, that every player has. And the way it works is we don't go, you are the chosen one, son, and so as the chosen one, this is the course of your life. Instead, we literally build your sort of destiny out of the placement of the stars at the time that you were born. We sort of use astrology to figure out what sorts of things are going to happen in your life, and then we present them to you, and how you respond to them dictates the course of your life as you're going to play. So, for example, you might be destined to suffer a great loss, and so the system will find a way to present you with the idea of a great loss and present you an opportunity to either, transform yourself and move in one direction with it, or to just suffer the loss and continue on your way if that's what you wanted to do. And depending on the decisions that you make, the story will then just continue on from there. Okay, the problem is that's a hard sell. There's no be the chosen one, right? Because I don't know if you're the chosen one. That depends on the stars.
But it might, and I don't think we have to be the chosen one. But let's take a pause there and examine that with the knowledge that you've shared with us so far. So let's say that I want to be a baker, and I come in the game, and I'm hoping to be a baker, and I have the destiny, and I don't know that I have the destiny that I'm going to suffer a great loss.
Yeah, you don't necessarily know.
Yeah. So I come in, I want to be a baker, and then what?
Well, presumably you'll apprentice yourself to another baker to learn how to do it, right? So you'll spend a few days of play basically learning how to bake.
Okay. So if I'm going to come in as a ranger in WoW or EQ Next, I'm going to go into my village, and I'm going to go look for a ranger, or there's going to be NPCs standing around, and they're going to have a exclamation point over their head, and they're going to say, hey, I've got a quest to help you be a ranger. I want to be a baker. I come into Chronicles of Elyria, and what happens?
Well, like I said, so when you start the game, there are basically 3 ways to play. You can play as a young, literally anywhere from 12 to 15-year-old child as a ward of the state. If you come in as a ward of the state, you basically are blank slate, right? What you do with your life is entirely up to you. There is no preconceptions about you. There are no ties to, like members of a family or anything like that. There's also no support structure. So that's kind of more of an advanced way to play. That's you want to be whatever you want to be. We'll open the door and you can go do it. And that's pretty cool. But for most players, what we expect that they'll do is instead they'll come in as a young adult, which is 15 in the age of in the world of Elyria. And as a young adult, you'll actually go through a series of questions about what your life was like, so that we can generate a sort of backstory for you. And this will sort of seed your character with, attribute changes, potentially skills that you might already know. But the other thing that it will do is it will begin quietly searching the world in the background for a family that matches that backstory. Right? And when it does, and when you're done selecting your information, it will then present to you a map of the world of Elyria. And on that map will be pins for every family that meets those criteria. So then you can click on each family and decide if you want to if you want to take control of one of the children in that family. When you do, you're kind of joining a mini guild when you do it. Because if the other members of the family, even if they're not, but if the other members of the families are players, then they have a vested interest in making sure that you can get on your path and get going, because your reputation, your fame, potentially even resources all contribute to the family. You live in their house as a child until you're ready to leave on your own, or you get old enough that they just kick you out if they want to, I guess. But yeah, so you have this sort of support network built into it. And family members can help you find your body if somebody does something terrible to you and you need to get back to it to get back into the game. They're like a mini guild, like I was saying. They even, kind of have their own communication channel. And so if you were to walk into that kind of family and be like, I want to be a baker, chances are they have a kitchen of their own. They might even know some baking, and they could get you started on that path themselves. There's no baker NPC with the exclamation point over their head or anything like that either. But if you couldn't find somebody, then the next thing that you would want to do is find a bakery, because a bakery is very likely to want to hire on an apprentice to help them make the baked goods that they sell. And so you would approach even an NPC and you would ask if they had work, and if they could, if they could teach you, and if they accepted, they would give you a job. And so from, a certain point every day, you'd have this job where you could make, buns or bread or whatever, and you would learn the skill and the recipes of baking, the sort of knowledge and literally player skill, because of the way the system works. When you bake, you actually bake. It's what we call diegetic. It's all in the world. There isn't a HUD or a game or a grid of UI that you need to manipulate to do it. And so that would set you on your course that way, and potentially you would make enough coin that you would maybe want to open your own bakery, or maybe you'd want to travel somewhere else in search of more esoteric recipes or secret techniques that you just don't know in your home village, because it's the kind of game where it's not everything known in every place. Even resources are asymmetric.
And so I guess my quick follow-up for that is, I'm presented with families who would likely have an interest in baking. Would it also show me bakeries, or would it just be kind of assumed that if there are families interested in baking, there's a bakery nearby those?
Yeah, in character creation, the entire focus is on finding you a family.
But I'm just saying, if I come out, maybe I choose not to choose one of the families. Do I then get to do a bakery, or what happens if I choose not to choose one of those?
So if you decide not to play a ward of the state, you have to pick a family.
Okay.
Right. There is no choice. There is a choice in families, but there is no alternative.
Okay. And would some of those be NPCs only, or would all of them?
They could potentially be NPCs only, and if they are NPCs. Not necessarily, but potentially. It depends on the family.
All right.
But that said, even as NPCs, they can still present you all of the same sort of support and advantage. They won't be as fun to talk to.
Okay, and then go ahead.
Yeah, I've got just a question on that. Then, is that something that you've talked about? Joining a family or being a ward of the state, and I know there's more likely public families you can just kind of join. I know there's the surname system. How does surnames work with joining families? Like, if I a la carte just get the surname and don't have my own home and don't purchase any NPC tokens or anything, do I have a family, or do I come in with a name and the family history, but basically no cousins or siblings or parents, uncles, anything anywhere?
Right. In that particular case, when you build the character, you select that you want to claim the surname that you set up for that character. And so when you enter the game, you'll still have your family and you'll still be a part of that family, but you will also be blah, 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 your last name, first of your line. Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which will then give you what we call family codes if you ever have children of your own, or if you marry, that you can give to other players so that they can join your family directly. You can also lock your family so that players can't join unless you want them to. So if you wanted to just raise your NPC clan, that's totally cool.
And then I guess one little follow-up to that. So if I did want to extend my family without, inviting other players in, would it be a matter of purchasing the NPC tokens before the game starts and investing them in a location where family will be? Or is that just general NPCs if I do that and they're not necessarily part of my family?
So NPC tokens are a little different, and I'm going to be hesitant when I talk here because that was all done before I actually got into the systems, and I'm not entirely certain I know them. But as I understand it, both the guild tokens and the villager tokens sort of represent resources that you're contributing to an overall cause in a period of the game that we call exposition, which is sort of the world building piece before we launch the game. Part of the way that we're fundraising is sort of directly involving you guys and setting the stage of the story with us. And so there's this period of the game where it's sort of like a prehistory to the launch where characters can enter the game and they can begin to build things. There's actually a bunch of different phases, so I'm sort of compressing everything into one, and I apologize. And I'm sure that everybody in chat is sitting there going, no, it's more than that. But for the sake of brevity, there's a period, call it exposition, wherein you guys help us build the world. When you do, there are people who have noble titles in the 6 kingdoms that can be in the continent. These nobles have responsibilities, but those responsibilities often require resources. Like if they need to build roads, they need the resources to build roads. If they want a city to become a bigger city, it needs to have a bigger population. And so the tokens give people who are not those royals a way to contribute to those world building efforts. So they buy the token, which represents the resources, and then they give the token to the people who actually control those resources. So like a villager token you would give to a mayor. A guild token you would give to a guild leader, and it would give the guild leader some resources that would expand the guild.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know.
So the only way for a family to get kids is to have them.
Pretty much, yeah. That's seeing chat was talking about that a little bit. Cool. Well, that makes sense. So if you start with your own surname and you're planning to just go it alone and not invite any friends in and not leave it open, expect to have a tight-knit family, which it sounds like from the risk of reputation being affected by others with your family name screwing around and making things more troublesome for you. It might actually make sense to do that just to keep yourself pretty even, plus or minus your own interactions in the world.
Yeah, that's a fair cop. And I'm certain that there will be people who play the game with no family, like with no external family at all, who like cultivate their next lifetimes, basically. Because when you have your kids, you can also like sort of guide their education as they grow up over the course of a few weeks. 1 week is an Illyrian year, so over the course of a few weeks, you can sort of guide your child to the goals that maybe you're intending to do next. And then when your character dies, you can take that soul, put it into the body of your child, and inhabit the child. And I'll bet you there are lots of people who will play that way, especially people who have things to inherit, shopkeepers, guild leaders, political figures. I bet you a lot of people will want to do that. Well, maybe not a lot of people, but a certain chunk of the community. But also, I think that other people will play families that are more open, or that are open to their friends but nobody else, right? So they might start a family, have a bunch of kids. When that lifetime is over, invite a bunch of their friends to play, and then they all play as siblings, as a sort of like, crime family. I don't know why I immediately went to crime. Actually, that wasn't fair, but whatever.
Cool. So I had one more follow-up. Could you try real quick to take us through the same deal with that orphan that you mentioned? So we start as a kid, we jump in the game, we want to live out in the forest, but our destiny is to lose something significant. Absolutely. So how might that work? And what might we do when we go out into the forest other than survival?
Right. So the first thing you'll have to take care of absolutely is survival. But let's assume that, you're crafty, you're resourceful, you know what berries to eat and all that kind of stuff. You're good in that regard. So the next step would be up to you. Do you want to maybe build a cabin out in the middle of nowhere? And do you want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Do the hermit thing? You could set out to do so. You'd have to build the tools yourself, and you'd have to start from the ground up because you don't have any real knowledge. But you could probably pull it off. You might need to go into town to talk to an architect for a blueprint, though. That might actually be a place where you would have to have an interaction with somebody. But otherwise, it's more about deciding what it is that you want to do. When the game engine decided that a piece of your destiny was ready to be exposed, however, it would analyze the world around you. So let's say that you were building that log cabin, right? I don't know why it's a log cabin now, but you were building a log cabin. So we were building this cabin. And you have, as a piece of your destiny, the idea that you are going to suffer a great loss at the hands of someone close. Well, you're a hermit, so you don't really have someone close. But you were an orphan at an orphanage. So maybe what the game system does at this point then is find one of those orphans that is an NPC and give them a reason to be near you so that they can sabotage your build, right? You could catch them in the act, so that the way that you suffer a great loss is more like, hey, I had to make sure that guy didn't do that anymore, and I did that the hard way, right? And that might be the loss that you suffer. But alternately, it might be that he gets away with it, and you have to deal with the fact that the home that you were building is now destroyed. And what are you going to do about that? Are you going to hunt the guy down? Are you going to quietly rebuild? Are you going to decide that the whole course of your life needs to change because of this action? That's the part that's up to you. And based on what you do next, the story system will look and see for another opportunity where the next piece of your destiny could be revealed, and then something similar will happen, though it'll be with a different scenario. There are these 36 dramatic situations, and they're all of the pieces of your destiny are sort of based on this theory of there being 36 dramatic situations, and it uses them as sort of templates for the stories that it presents you. And I'm trying to remember, is that Mazakowski? I'm trying to remember who the original person who found the 36 dramatic situations is, but I don't think it's Mazakowski. I may be wrong. But anyway, it's based on this theory, and so the destiny that you have may not be bad. It may be that after suffering a great loss, you're presented with an opportunity for a spiritual rebirth, right? Like the course of your destiny is both not directly set, but also not necessarily an arc from bad to good or an arc from good to bad. It might be a wave in the middle, right? That's up to the stars. That's the piece that's set up by the astrology.
And that's per character.
Correct.
And so I'm almost done. You, with that character, you aren't presented with families, right?
Correct. Wards don't have
You're
families.
Going
they
straight into right. Right. And do you still get to choose which orphanage, or how
Correct.
does that? Okay. And then what about these kind of packs that we're picking from? That we're purchasing. So if I'm an orphan out in the forest, would I come with I don't really remember all the names, but like an adventurer's pack, or there's one that has like a compass or something like that.
Right.
Would I be able to bring those with me in order to help me survive better in the
Absolutely.
In the forest? Okay.
Absolutely. And if you have, I think it's a bloodline or higher, I don't remember, but if you have the right packages, you can also use any EP points that are given to your package to do things like expand those packs, or maybe add a book about baking, or that kind of thing to them. Or the store isn't open yet because we're not in exposition yet. But
Okay. All right, so that gives me a good overview. I hope that helped everybody else, and everybody else jump in. I'm done for a while. Thank you.
All right, I got basically 3 questions, but the first one is, so we'll take the example of, we'll start with the baker in the family, the guy that wants to be a baker. He's in the family. It's like, okay, well, mom didn't quite know enough. The local baker already has an apprentice and doesn't quite have time for me, so I've got to hit the road. Right. So I'm moving on, and I know that, well, leaving home means that I've got to figure out how the hell I'm going to survive.
Absolutely.
So how much of my play time, and we know that it's a survival focused game, like making sure that you stay alive is an important part of that, but how much of my play time as a human playing the game am I going to spend making sure that my character is fed, making sure that I've had enough to drink? Do I need to bathe? What are the limitations here, and how much pressure is that exerting, and where are the different pressures coming from? So we have food and dehydration, but wildlife, whatever. Can you walk me through, what's it like to survive in this game, and how much of my playtime is going to be focused on that?
Absolutely. That was actually one of the very first questions I had too. Wait, how does all this survival stuff work? So there are a couple of quality of life things that we do first that I'll just mention, so that if you're not interested in survival, understand that there is a way to not deal with these problems. If you're living in a city or a settlement, even if you're just like in a way station on the road that happens to have a tavern, and the tavern has food, it will provide a benefit that effectively just assumes you've eaten, right? So that you won't ever like starve. Similarly, if there's a well nearby or a source of fresh water, the same sort of deal. You won't really have to worry about it, right? So for the stay-at-homes, it's not a problem. The only one they really need to worry about are things like, well, it's not one, but the only things they need to worry about are the temperature, weather, like sandstorm, snow, lightning, thunder, rain, like any of the things that could cause it to be wet enough that you might get sick, or cold enough that you might go into hypothermia, or warm enough that you might get sunstroke, or the particles are dense enough that you might literally like scratch the corneas of your eyes, or otherwise have like serious problems if you were going to be into. You would still have to deal with. Everybody has to deal with these things when they happen. But as far as the like normal ongoing stuff, that gets taken care of when you're in a city, provided that the city actually has the infrastructure to do so, which is a key point, right? If you found a city and then you just sort of like sit there, you're all going to die, right? But as long as you set everything up, it's very nice and easy. But if you're out on the road, or if you're the ranger living in the forest, or if you're an intrepid explorer setting out off into the unknown, you're going to have to deal with other aspects of survival, like hydration and starvation. But also, everybody has to deal with what we call fatigue. There isn't a health bar in Chronicles of Elyria exactly. Instead, what we have is a stat called fatigue. As you do things, just going through the course of the day, fatigue builds up. Some things can reduce it. Sleeping can get rid of it completely. But your fatigue builds up. When you take damage, or when you like are poisoned and you suffer some of its effects, one of the things that's going to happen is it's going to spike your fatigue. And if your fatigue maxes out, you'll fall unconscious. If nothing changes from that point forward and you're okay, you're like static, you're not suffering any more damage or anything like that at all, you'll basically sleep off the fatigue and you'll be able to stand back up and everything will be fine. But on the other hand, if there are ongoing problems, that fatigue may turn into incapacitation, which is effectively death, right? And if you're incapacitated, somebody could come up on you and they could do what we call a coup de grace, which is to kill you for real, separate your soul from your body. If you do that, you can't do anything until you return to your body. And your body is going to, I don't want to use the word rot because we don't actually rot your body, but your body is going to be unable to host your soul if you're away from it too long. And so you could actually end up permanently dying if you don't get back to your soul in time. Which is another reason my families are useful, because they can sense when that happens and they can help you find your body. Anyway, most of the survival stuff though is more about like traveling through a biome that you're unprepared for. If you are heading up to go trade with the Broodveer, well, the Broodveer generally live in the north where it's cold and it's snowy all the time. And if you don't have the right clothes on, you'll probably freeze to death before you get there. Likewise, if you're going to visit the Weird live in semi-arid deserts. And so if you brought your Broodveer furs and that's all you had, you're probably going to suffer sunstroke and you're probably going to die. And I'm very sorry about that. But generally speaking, the survival aspects of the game are really, I don't want to say easy to deal with, but rather not the kind of like motivator they might be in a game like Ark. It's the same similar mechanics, but they're not really the focus of the game. They're more about making the game feel real and making sure that the way people behave sort of jives with the way we expect them to behave, because we behave because we have similar things that we have to deal with and similar motivations.
All right, thank you. You want to carry on with that?
I just want to jump in real quick with a couple of things to think about. The Weird, I was reading about them today, and it said that they're going to have to maybe change their clothes several times per day, depending on the weather, which again does not sound like fun. That sounds like work. So what's up with that part? What do you have to say?
That's probably a bit of an overstatement. So actually, the Weird are actually one of my favorite tribes. They're really cool. They're a really different way to play, however. They're sort of collectivist. So like every weird town is one big weird family. So they like share gear. They're all connected in the same way that families are. But the weird also sort of, as a culture, don't exactly believe in individuality. They sort of believe that, the tribe are all one. In fact, if you were to ask a weird what their name was, they would say, "We are the weird." Right. They wouldn't tell you because their names aren't for you, right? And so they're a strange way to play, and so it's easy to like get the wrong idea about them. But the weather where they live doesn't change so often that they like absolutely have to change their clothes 4 or 5 times a day. It's not really like that, but it's more like they can suffer extreme weather events sometimes. And so the norms of a typical, desert cycle of being really hot during the day and really cold during the night could also be disrupted by a storm in the middle of the day or something like that. And so, under those rare extreme occasions, you might actually need to worry about the environment changing rapidly. Normally, though, they dress for the heat during the day and they dress for the cold during the night.
And just as its general thing, I don't know, the write-up on these tribes is, it reads like a European talking about foreign cultures and, drab. I don't think the weird think of themselves as wearing drab clothing.
No, I don't think that's fair.
So it's just, it would be nice to maybe get a read of these cultures if people are going to ever tweak these write-ups. It's from the culture's point of view versus from the outsider's point of view, because right now I'm like, that's, it's kind of spinning fair. It like that. That's a dark elf, or that's an orc. And, we know what we think about dark elves.
They're kind of like anthropology reports. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. But okie doke. Go back, guys. Sorry.
All right. So now I'm this baker. I've got a pretty good idea of what I've got to do to survive, to travel, but instead of really going to the next town, like to learn to be a baker, like I told my mom I was going to, I am now deciding that I am going to seek adventure. So, in Chronicles of Elyria, what would that mean?
Well, that kind of depends on you. If you're looking for treasure, you might try to find yourself a treasure map. Otherwise, you might join a caravan to set off to places you've never seen before and to see what's out there and what it's what it offers you. You'll probably have to work for it, though. You'll probably have to be like a porter or something, since you can't fight yet, you baker. but maybe along the way you'll learn how to fight. Maybe along the way you'll all run out of food and you'll discover that adventure means you've taken up the life of banditry, because God damn it, you got to eat. Really, that's kind of what it's about, right? It's about making a decision and then watching the sort of impact of that decision unfold across the world. And so, adventure can mean a lot of things, but it's probably never going to be the thing you sought out for. That's generally how those stories go.
So I'm curious about something real quick. So, I talk about this all the time. I just want to be a farmer. So kind of on that point, is it possible to like? When I think of that, I think of, the tales of a person who grows up on a farm and they practice sword fighting with someone who was some old weapons master and they develop. Is that going to be something possible? Like you could have a community where you're a farmer, but Sog has an interest in, maybe one day I'm going to go out and do that. Can you actually build some sort of skills while you're, primarily a baker, but you're on the side learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because there's a mechanic where we separate player knowledge from character knowledge, right? And so, as a player, you may know, hey, I can swing a sword around, and we have some game mechanics, and you'll be able to fight, as well as you can with the techniques that you have. But the techniques that you have are all in the character. So if you understand, for example, you know, that there's a perfect time to throw an uppercut, but your character doesn't really know what an uppercut is, you just can't do it. There's just nothing you can do about that, right? But on the other hand, somebody who knows how to throw a good uppercut can show you how. And at first, you know, you can really only do it while you're working with them because you're really bad at it, right? But eventually you'll be able to do it. And then eventually you'll be good enough at it that you could teach it to somebody else. And now, you know, you and all of your buddies are all, you know, like, right. But also, you know, the grizzly old soldier who retired onto the farm can teach you everything that he knows. And he can do it slowly over time, right? Because it's all about literally demonstrating those skills of like sparring with you, you know, literally teaching you how they work. And then your character picks up the knowledge. And then once your character has the knowledge and the sort of familiarity with the knowledge that they've got some confidence, they can apply those skills themselves outside of the demonstration, outside of the teaching system, basically. So it's totally possible, which is awesome because I feel like you can't have a decent fantasy world without all those kinds of hooks out there, you know. Likewise, I'm going to seed some of the world's secret techniques in mountaintop, you know, hermitages where one dude happens to know the technique for splitting the earth with a dagger blade, but only that one guy, and good luck finding it, you know?
And so how does that mechanic work? Do you turn on teaching mode? Is it something, how is that?
Yeah, it's actually two-part. There's from the instructor side, you turn on, I forget what it's called, but we'll just say it's teach. You turn on teach. From the student side, you use a skill called observation to watch what they're doing and learn from it. And then when it comes to combat, once you've like learned from watching them, you can then apply it, but only with somebody else who has the skill in a sparring environment. Once you gain enough confidence with it through sparring, then you can actually use it in combat.
Okay.
Now, that's something that I've always wondered about, because it sounds like there's actually a lot more emphasis on, you know, real world systems, not just in the, you know, the way that crafting is presented, but, you know, using a fatigue system rather than just a classic health bar. That's actually something that my brother and I have talked about, just based on how to take real world physiology and turn it into, you know, gameplay mechanics. So, you know, there's a lot of that I'm really excited to see here.
Yeah, I really love the systems of this game. It's honestly one of the reasons that I was so keen to join the team. There's a lot of like real thought put into translating feel into game mechanics, which is a big piece of my lament about the way certain games are played these days, is that feel is kind of gone, right? And so I was all over it, and I'm so glad that I got the opportunity, because working on these systems is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of fun. I'd love to work on something like that myself, honestly. So the question I have kind of as a follow-up to that thought is, so you've talked about, you know, learning it from somebody and kind of training it on your own a little bit. It definitely sounds like this is getting far away from the whole UO macroing on a training dummy until you're at skill 50 and your strength and dex are where you want it or whatever. And
RuneScape make a line of 1,000 campfires.
yes, and those sorts of shenanigans. But instead, is it the sort of thing where you would have to do some amount of training to potentiate your ability to actually learn the skill and then actually execute on the skill to kind of fill in the potentiation, or is it some kind of combination of the two, or is that a little too real world complexity for the overall goal of things here?
It's probably somewhere in the middle of all that.
Okay.
So we looked at games like UO and RuneScape just as players, right? Like almost everybody on the team will have, if not a UO story, then, you know, an EverQuest story, or for those of us with the right age, a Mud story, or, you know, a Realm story, or a Meridian 59 story, right? Because these were the games that we all like cut our teeth on, you know? And so we thought about how they worked and how they failed. And, you know, candidly, one of the ways that UO failed was that their skill system required you to grind, right? And we thought about ways that we could deal with that problem, but still have the feeling of like, you know, for lack of a better word, the training montage, right? The sense that, you know, I'm actually progressing and I'm learning and I'm gaining like useful things out of this. And I'm not just taping my button down and going out and having a beer, which like I literally used to do when I played UO, right? I would tape my button down standing next to the training dummy, and then I would go down to the bar and come back a couple hours later and be like, aha, I can sword now, you know? And that's just not like, you shouldn't incentivize not playing. that's
no, it's boring.
And so a lot of the systems, you know, you guys have actually even heard me say it before, but I sort of have this personal mantra that's like, verisimilitude is greater than veracity. It's important to capture the right feel, but it really doesn't matter at all if it's real, right? Because if it feels right, you won't care. So I can capture the things that make it feel right and get rid of all of the stuff that makes that terrible in reality. And I can give you, I hope, you know, our goal anyway is to give you that quintessence, that yeah, I'm a hero, I'm learning stuff without actually having to go to school and learn this stuff, you know. And so we sort of replicated the steps. So, you know, there's a period when you gain initial skill, which we call the sort of novice period, where you could do things like smack a training dummy for a little while and maybe gain a little bit of proficiency, but it's never going to teach you anything new. It's really just going to make you slightly more effective at the stuff that you have. To surpass that sort of next tier, to become a true apprentice, you're going to have to find somebody with knowledge or some other way to get that knowledge, and you're going to have to acquire it. But when you do, then you're going to want to train. But, you know, these techniques are the things that training dummies won't work on. So you're going to have to train with somebody else, or head out with nothing but the book of how to fight in hand and pray that you live long enough for that to help, you know, which, by the way, I don't recommend. Find a sensei. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing. You know, we're trying to capture that feel without capturing the grind. And so we try to build all of this in the world so that it feels right, but we also try to like abstract and simplify all of the actual steps that you're taking along the way.
Okay, I have just one more question on my list. It's going back to kind of like my question about survival, and like in my head as I'm reading, I'm pretty excited about this game, you know, I showed you some videos. Like some of the systems in the game are like things that I had thought of that I totally wanted well before I'd heard of this game. But my concern as a player is, you know, I don't want to feel like I'm working too hard, and I don't want to. But the other thing is, I don't want to feel oppressed in the game. So my question is about the hierarchy and ongoing and caste system and politics. Let's say I'm adventurer or gentry level. How much pressure in my day-to-day life should I feel is coming from the mayor or the count, the duke or the king? Like, how much of my time am I thinking about, like, other than the valid RP reasons, like I am part of this community and I need to be taking, how much of my play time do I feel like I am just satisfying what I have to do for the mayor or the count or whatever? How does that feel for me not in that position?
Hopefully the pressure's off. To be fair, though, that's not entirely under our control because the kingdoms are run by players for the most part. In fact, right now there are no NPC kingdoms, I don't believe. That said, your local count might be an NPC. There are way more counties than there are counts. So let's say that you're a farmer living in a small village out in the middle of nowhere. Your count will want taxes from you at some point. He'll send the sheriff out to get them. That hopefully is your only ongoing interaction with the count. But on the other hand, if it's Count Desaad and he's really interested in seeing you suffering, that might not be how that works. But that's not a Chronicle of Elyria's system. That's more about player action, right? And as as a simple farmer, I might pick up and move to get out of that situation because everybody needs to eat. So your skills are going to be applicable somewhere else. Or I might lead an uprising to depose the count. Actually, that's also up to me because chances are I'm not the only one who feels that way. If it really is a bastard who's in your face about this stuff. So hopefully, the pressure of threat of revolt is enough for them to reduce the pressure that they put on you. But if not, you do what you got to do.
Okay, well, thank you for answering. We do have 2 questions from the
Can I get 2 follow-up questions
and
then we'll do questions? We might be able to put these 2 together. So I'm wondering if you talk about the gear of a baker, gear and tools of a baker, if there are any, and also I'm wondering if this was happening in a weird tribe. Since you said gear is communal, and I think I read that housing is communal, and I forget how it was worded, but we were wondering what that means in terms of it's not really ownership of a house, but what was it, Neuro?
Residence.
What is residence? Like, if a residence is communal, what does that mean exactly in terms of gameplay?
Yeah, so in this case, you don't really actually have to worry about that. The system is actually not as bad as it can often sound. So you own your house in a weird settlement. It's yours, right? And the stuff in it is yours. However, if somebody is on your property and you've given them permission to be there, that also means that they can do whatever they want with your stuff, right? So if they wanted to work with you at your forge, they don't have to ask to borrow a hammer. They can just go pick a hammer up and get to work. If you're baking and the bread is burning, they don't need your permission to take the paddle and pull the loaf of bread out of the oven, right? They just don't need it. It's just assumed that you guys are all working together towards a common purpose because that's what the weird do, right? However...
But wait, in a different tribe, you might have to ask permission to do those things?
Correct. In a different tribe, if they don't have the rights to open your oven and they walk up to go take the burning bread out of the oven, they've technically committed a crime. Now, you might decide to do nothing about it. You might be like, oh, thanks, man, that was burning and everything's cool. But if you didn't want that to happen, then you now have legal rights that you can try to address this in a couple of different ways. That's probably pretty minor. That's probably not the kind of thing you would maybe take to a constable, but maybe you would. I don't know. I guess that would probably depend on circumstances, right? But yeah. So the weird collectivism thing is also like it applies sort of at that level. So if they wanted to take that wooden paddle to their bakery, they couldn't do so. That would be stealing. Right. It's not that everyone in the settlement can just take your stuff or sleep in your bed. It's not Fallout 4. Right. It's more like everybody is your buddy.
And how does it work exactly culturally if everything is communal except you have levels of nobles and hierarchy of housing? I don't understand how you can have lower class, middle class, and upper class housing in a culture where everybody is trying to be the same to the degree that everybody's basically unisex. That seems weird.
Right. So one way to look at it might be to say that everybody is approaching an ideal of the perfect weird. And that's kind of maybe a weird way to put it, but like everybody wants to be the quintessential one being, the one weird. And those that are closest to that are more weird than you, which is weird. Weird is not an adjective, but still. So they're given a greater level of respect, but also in exchange for that, a greater level of responsibility, which is where their noble houses and hierarchy sort of comes from, right? That person that is closest to that perfect ideal, well, they're clearly the person who needs to be guiding the course of the weird because they most understand what the weird are, right? And in this case, that also means that they understand their deity, the twofold queen, and her plan, and the balance that they're trying to maintain. which is another aspect of their culture, is that it's very much centered around this particular religion that believes in a black and a white, and the balance between them, a good and an evil, for lack of a better word, a life and a death. And so their job is to maintain that balance, often as stabbily as possible, but that's their great work, right? And that's the thing that they're all working towards, is to get the world in perfect balance.
Great. Okay, I'm done. We could do questions now.
All right. I'll read off this first one from John 1812. Said, research mechanics are slated to allow players to pursue unexpected lines of invention and innovation. Do you see solo players being able to compete with schools and guilds, or will research primarily be a group effort? He's basically saying if he wants to be a master of something, learning something special on his own, can he be anywhere near an organized team?
So this is one of the parts where the players driving the sort of course of the world is really cool, because the answer to the question is, well, of course, a large university or a big guild with a massive research organization is going to be able to make consistent and potentially rapid progress on whatever it is that they seek to research. No question. Which means if you're the little guy researching the same thing, you're probably not going to beat them. But on the other hand, you might be the little guy researching something else entirely, something nobody else has ever thought about at all. And if that research pans out, that means that you're going to be holding on to an innovation that literally nobody else in the world has, right? Doesn't matter how big their university was. If they didn't think about it, they didn't know to research it. And if they didn't know to research it, they can't beat you.
Yeah, I always thought about the idea of the arms race of, copper, then iron, then magic, true silver, and then, mithril and adamant and whatever. And, no, I always like the idea that you've got some dude who's just like sitting there banging out copper swords and improving the technique. When you come back to him a year later, his copper swords are, totally able to rival an iron blade. They're, he's got the techniques. He's actually got like a little bit of an alloy going to the metal.
Right.
Fully reinforced it. He's able to actually teach you how to do the strike that breaks an iron blade. And it's like, well, hell, this guy's amazing. Copper's cheap as hell. I'm going to arm my people with this guy.
Absolutely. I also think that research is actually literally directed by players too. So, there's like a tree of existing technologies that like we know are going to be into the world. And so those you don't necessarily need direct player input from. You're more like, I want to research how to make good steel. And we're like, okay, well, research into steel is going to yield some of these results, right? But you might say, I want to research the ratcheting winch, right? And we're going to go, okay, the ratcheting winch, huh? All right, well, that from where you guys are right now, that's probably going to take this. And then we'll just let you continue that research. And meanwhile, in the background, we're going to go start building some ratcheting winches because they're going to end up in the world. So as soon as we're done, that research, ta-da, pans out. Blam, ratcheting winches. Right? So that's like the coolest piece of the research system to me, is that you guys can literally direct our development with your research.
Okay, one thing that was brought up is we didn't get a full rundown. Sorry, we don't want to keep you much over time here, but we didn't get a full answer on the tools that a baker might need and what.
Oh, right.
There.
That's actually a really good question too. I apologize for glazing over that. So every skill, every craft in the game is sort of built around this idea of techniques, recipes, patterns, and stations, right? Stations also are paired with something called tools. So let's say that you wanted to, let's say make an eclair, right? So there are a few ingredients that you know that you're going to need to make. An eclair is basically, a puff pastry, a cream filling, and a chocolate, what do they call it? A chocolate topping, an icing, right? So you would need then a pattern for puff pastry, a pattern for cream filling. I'm pointing at fingers you can't see, sorry. Right? A pattern for puff pastry, a pattern for cream filling, and a pattern for chocolate icing. your recipe for your eclair would tell you all of these things, right? But you can use any puff pastry, any cream filling, and any chocolate icing. You don't necessarily have to use the ones that are defined in your recipe. That's up to you. However, you will need those components, and those components are built out of patterns, right? We call them patterns mainly because most of the other crafts use patterns. It's weird when we're talking about baking, but whatever. To make them, let's start with the puff pastry. So with the puff pastry, you're going to need, your flour. You're going to need your egg wash. You're going to need all of the various components that are not components, but the various raw materials that are necessary to make a puff pastry. You're also going to need a pot to mix stuff in. You're going to need, a spatula or a spoon to mix with. You're going to need a baking sheet to put them on, and you're going to need an oven that is fired up to the right temperature so that you can bake your puff pastry once you've made it. And the pattern for puff pastry would tell you the steps necessary to do this. And they're literally recipes. They're not like, oh, I can click this on the thing and I'll get what I want. They're like, hey, take the flour, mix it with some water, break an egg into it, start mixing it up until it turns into a dough and start kneading it, right? Once it's well kneaded, place it on the sheet in these, in portions of this size, right? Then place the sheet in the oven and wait. And it'll say, bring them back out when they're a golden brown. Because the game there, is a little bit like Cooking Mama in the sense that you have to do the cooking, right, as an experience. But also the game is, well, wait a minute, I don't know how long it takes them to be golden brown. I'm going to have to watch that oven until they're golden brown to get a sense of how long that takes, right? But then once they're made, I now have my puff pastry component. So then I would go, make my cream, and that's the same sort of deal. You're probably going to need, some heavy cream. You're going to need some sugar. I don't actually know this recipe, so apologies to everybody who actually makes eclairs, but you're going to need whatever the other components are. And you're going to have to go through the steps necessary to actually make that. They're grossly abbreviated and quietly abstracted, so you don't have to sit there and stir for 15 minutes or whatever. But you will have to go through some of the motions necessary to make this happen. Once you have all of the components, you can combine them in the final step of the recipe. And in the case of an eclair, if you actually did it the way I described, what you would end up with are some cooked puff pastries and a bowl of icing and a bowl of cream filling, because you got to put the goddamn cream filling in. But if you had done it right, if you had a real recipe, it would have told you when to do these things at the right times with all of the stuff that you were making. And so once you did, you'd have to bake it in the oven, then you could take it out, then you would put the icing on top of it, and then you would you'd let it cool first because the icing, anyway, right. So all of these happen at the station's work table, oven, and back to the work table for the icing, right? The tools involved are a bowl, probably 3 of them, because you're either that or you're gonna have to wash one bowl in between all of your steps. A spoon to mix with, the baking sheet, and potentially a spatula to get the baking sheet out of the oven, right? The oven station is also going to require some sort of wood or fuel in order to keep it hot, and you're going to have to spark that fire and get it going. That's basically the sort of process. So as far as what tools a baker uses, we haven't actually finished writing all of those recipes and systems yet. Or the systems are written, but we haven't finished writing all the content yet. So I don't exactly know what the complete list of tools is, but that's an example of the kind of things that you'll be doing.
Right, and the quality of the tools might improve the product. We might want to make sure our oven is kept up to speed, or I don't know if there's decay or degradation. But in
absolutely.
general, we might be interested in upgrading tools, even for a baker, gear, even for
Absolutely.
a baker, in order for better quality.
And for that matter, I probably should have mentioned, there's a mechanic. I've been trying to glaze over the mechanics, because I know that you guys, we already do a really good job of telling people how the game works. It's what it actually means that you guys are more interested in. But one of the mechanics in crafting is this idea of what we call crafting challenges that can happen while you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. Those are related in part to the difficulty of the recipe, your skill at the particular craft, and the quality and condition of your tools in your station, right? So A high quality oven that's well cleaned and well maintained isn't necessarily likely to have the fire go out, or isn't necessarily likely to have non-uniform heating areas, so that you could find out that you actually put in your pastries into a piece of the oven that was too hot, so it cooked too fast, or that was too cool, so it never really cooked well. But on the other hand, a dirty old stove that hasn't been particularly well kept might have these problems. They're way more likely. Likewise, while you're mixing, you might have a moment where the bowl slips out of your hand because it's degraded and kind of old, and so it didn't fit in your hand right or something. Different crafting challenges at different stations, and how they happen depends on your skill, the tools, and the difficulty of the recipe.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, keep going.
One last question that we could probably get a one or two sentence answer for, and I can close this out here. It was, if training with other people is how you learn more, where does the skill originally come from? Who is Trainer Zero?
That's a good question. So you don't enter an empty world in Chronicles of Elyria. There's a whole world's population out there, and they have their own goals, their own skill sets, their own desires, and they're out there living their lives just like you are. When I say just like you are, I mean that they're literally using the same mechanics, the same sort of like systems. There isn't special casing stuff for the NPCs as for how crafting works. The only exception is we don't bother drawing them UI when we're running them on the server, but they still play the same games. They do it the same way, right? And so the answer to where that knowledge is it's out there in the heads of all of these NPCs. Also, there are books that exist in the world. So there are, we call them, like, for example, martial codices. If you were particularly like trying to learn a martial style from someplace that didn't exist in your knowledge, that's a weird way to put it, someplace that you hadn't been to, you might be able to get a codex from, the fighters of that area sent to you, or otherwise somehow delivered to you, so that you could potentially learn some of their moves afar. That's the hard way, because you don't have anybody to demonstrate it for you. So you've got to, like, literally with book in hand, sort of try to figure out how to use it, get it up to a point where you're, about a novice with it, and then try fighting people with it. And you're going to do a pretty bad job at first, but eventually you'll get proficient with it.
All right, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate having you on the show, and thanks everybody who came out and spent an hour with us, hanging out, talking about Chronicles of Elyria. We're planning on being back with this show 2 weeks from now. Next week, if you're interested in Ashes of Creation, we do a show called The Ashen Forge. We're a little bit deeper into that show, and come hang out then too. We did have one more question, which was about where you can learn more about Chronicles of Elyria, and I will put the website and a link to the Discord in chat right after we close up. The Discord for this game is really the best Discord channel I've ever been in. So
I love our Discord.
You randomly type in a musing about something, and 80 players and 3 devs comment they're talking about. Like, it's a really good experience, a large community, and we'll definitely give you all the link there. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.